I chose to work as a simple cleaning lady in the very company I secretly owned, keeping my true identity hidden from everyone. When the arrogant blonde CEO decided to publicly humiliate and slap me for being just the help, she had no idea she was about to discover that the powerless janitor she despised was actually the woman who could fire her with a single phone call. What happens when someone mistakes quiet observation for weakness and assumes that holding a mop means you hold no power? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Elena Vasquez, and 6 months ago, if you had seen me mopping the marble floors of Meridian Financial Tower at 5 in the morning, you would have thought exactly what everyone else did. Another invisible worker, another face in the crowd of people who keep the corporate world running while remaining completely unseen by those who matter. I wore simple gray uniforms with my hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, carried my supplies from floor to floor, and blended into the background so perfectly that executives would discuss confidential deals right in front of me as if I were a piece of furniture. But here's what they didn't know. Every morning when I swiped my employee badge to enter the building, I wasn't just clocking in as Elena the cleaner. I was conducting the most important research of my business career, studying my own company from the ground up, learning truths that boardroom presentations could never reveal. Because 3 years ago, when I inherited Meridian Financial from my late father, I made a decision that shocked everyone who knew me. Instead of stepping immediately into the corner office, I chose to start at the very bottom. My father, Roberto Vasquez, had built Meridian from a small investment firm into one of the most respected financial institutions on the West Coast. When he passed away suddenly from a heart attack, I was 28 years old with an MBA from Stanford and 5 years of experience at competing firms. Everyone expected me to slip seamlessly into his role, to become the polished face of the company overnight. But I had seen too many inherited businesses fail, because the new generation never understood the foundation their success was built on. So I made a choice that my board of directors thought was temporary insanity. I appointed Victoria Ashford, our most ambitious senior vice president, as interim CEO while I supposedly took time to grieve and prepare for leadership. What I actually did was create an entirely new identity. Elena Vasquez became Elena Morales, a single mother who needed work and was grateful for any opportunity. I forged employment documents, created a backstory, and applied for a position in our cleaning crew. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was essentially going undercover in my own company, but it felt necessary. I wanted to understand how Meridian really operated when the owner's daughter wasn't watching. I wanted to know how employees were actually treated, how decisions affected people at every level, and what the company culture was like when people thought no one important was listening. I thought it would take maybe 6 weeks to gather the insights I needed. I never imagined I would still be there 6 months later, or that what I discovered would change everything I thought I knew about business, power, and human nature. Working as a cleaner at Meridian Financial was like being a ghost with access to every secret. I cleaned the executive offices after hours, emptying wastebaskets filled with discarded strategies and overhearing phone calls that shaped the financial futures of thousands of clients. I mopped the conference room floors where partnerships were forged and dissolved, where careers were made and destroyed with casual conversations over imported coffee. The most successful people in the building looked through me so completely that I began to understand invisibility as a form of power. My small apartment in the Marina District became my refuge, a modest one-bedroom where I could drop the careful facade of grateful employee and remember who I really was. The walls were covered with photographs from my real life, pictures of my father and me at company events, my graduation from Stanford, vacations in places that Elena Morales could never afford. But every morning I would look at those photos and then transform back into the woman who needed this job, who was grateful for the opportunity to earn honest wages doing honest work. The other members of the cleaning crew became my unexpected teachers. Rosa, who had been with the company for 15 years and knew more about the executives' personal lives than their own families did. James, who worked 2 other jobs to support his disabled son and still arrived every day with a smile and an encouraging word for everyone. Maria, who was studying accounting at night school while working full-time, determined to create a better life for her children. These people taught me lessons about resilience, dignity, and the real meaning of hard work that no business school could provide. But it was Victoria Ashford who became my most unwitting educator. As the interim CEO, she had stepped into my father's office with an enthusiasm that quickly revealed itself as something much darker. Victoria was everything I had once thought I admired in business leaders. She was sharp, decisive, ruthlessly efficient, and absolutely committed to success. At 35, she had climbed the corporate ladder through a combination of brilliant strategic thinking and an almost supernatural ability to identify and exploit other people's weaknesses. Victoria was also breathtakingly beautiful in a way that she weaponized with surgical precision. Her platinum blonde hair was always perfectly styled, her makeup applied with artistic skill, her wardrobe a carefully curated collection of power suits that cost more than most people earned in months. She had the kind of presence that commanded attention the moment she entered a room, and she had learned to use that presence to intimidate, manipulate, and control everyone around her. From my invisible position, I watched Victoria transform the company culture in ways that made my blood run cold. She implemented new policies that squeezed more productivity out of employees while cutting their benefits. She restructured departments to create competition between teams, encouraging backstabbing and internal conflict as motivational tools. She treated the support staff like they were subhuman, speaking to receptionists and janitors with a casual cruelty that revealed her true character when she thought no one important was watching. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The most disturbing thing about Victoria's leadership style wasn't the policies she implemented or even the people she hurt. It was how effective her methods were at generating short-term profits. Under her guidance, Meridian's quarterly earnings had increased by 12%. Client satisfaction surveys showed improved response times and more aggressive investment strategies. The board of directors was thrilled with her performance and had begun making not-so-subtle suggestions that perhaps Elena Vasquez wasn't really needed as more than a figurehead. Every night, I would return to my apartment and review the day's observations, taking notes on everything I had witnessed. I documented the way Victoria spoke to employees when she thought no executives were around. I recorded conversations about cutting costs by eliminating what she called dead weight from the support staff. I watched her systematically destroy the company culture my father had spent decades building, replacing collaboration with competition and respect with fear. But Victoria's true nature was most clearly revealed in her interactions with people she considered beneath her notice. The way she spoke to the cleaning crew wasn't just dismissive, it was actively cruel. She would leave messes deliberately, dropping papers on floors she knew had just been mopped, or spilling coffee on surfaces that had just been cleaned. She would change meeting rooms at the last minute, forcing night shift cleaners to redo hours of work for her convenience. She treated facility services like her personal servants, demanding they accommodate increasingly unreasonable requests, with no consideration for their time or dignity. I began to understand that Victoria's success wasn't built on the excellence I had initially admired. It was built on a fundamental belief that other people existed solely to serve her ambitions, that courtesy and respect were luxuries she could afford to dispense only to those who could advance her career. She saw the world as divided into two categories, people who mattered and people who didn't. And in her mind, people like Elena could never matter. The breaking point began to build during my 5th month undercover, when Victoria announced a new initiative called Operational Excellence. On the surface, it sounded like a standard corporate efficiency program. In reality, it was a systematic plan to eliminate what she called non-essential personnel and replace long-term employees with cheaper, contract workers who would have no benefits and no job security. The cleaning crew, maintenance staff, and security team were all targeted for replacement. Rosa, who had dedicated 15 years of her life to keeping Meridian's offices spotless, would be replaced by a rotation of contract workers who would be paid half her salary and receive no health insurance. James, whose intimate knowledge of the building systems had prevented countless minor disasters from becoming major problems, would be dismissed in favor of a service company that would charge twice as much for half the expertise. Maria, who had earned the respect of executives throughout the building for her reliability and discretion, would lose her job just 6 months before graduating with her accounting degree. Victoria presented this plan to the board as a necessary modernization that would save the company nearly $2 million annually. She used phrases like streamlining operations and optimizing human resources to describe what was essentially the destruction of dozens of families' financial security. She spoke about these people as if they were numbers on a spreadsheet rather than human beings whose lives would be devastated by her decisions. From my position mopping the conference room floor during her presentation, I watched the board members nod approvingly as Victoria explained how eliminating would boost profitability. None of them asked about the human cost of these decisions. None of them considered what would happen to the employees who had served the company faithfully for years. They saw only the projected savings and the improved quarterly projections. That night, I sat in my apartment staring at the photographs of my father, remembering the stories he used to tell about building Meridian Financial. He had always insisted that a company's true strength came from its people, that treating employees with respect and dignity wasn't just morally right, but was essential for long-term success. He had built Meridian's reputation on the principle that everyone who contributed to the company's success deserved to be valued and protected. Victoria was systematically destroying everything he had built, and she was doing it in his name, sitting in his office, using his company's resources to implement policies that violated every principle he had stood for. She was turning Meridian Financial into exactly the kind of soulless corporation he had spent his career fighting against, and the worst part was that it was working. Her cruel efficiency was generating the kinds of profits that would make investors happy and board members wealthy. I realized that my experiment in understanding the company from the ground up had revealed a truth I wasn't prepared for. The problem with Meridian Financial wasn't inefficiency or lack of direction. The problem was Victoria Ashford, and by extension, it was my own failure to recognize the kind of person I had entrusted with my father's legacy. I had been so focused on learning about business from the bottom that I had forgotten the most important lesson my father had taught me. The character of leadership determines the character of everything that follows. The next morning, I arrived at work with a new sense of purpose. I was no longer Elena Morales, the invisible cleaner gathering insights for her future role as company owner. I was Elena Vasquez, the rightful CEO of Meridian Financial, and I was about to begin the most important performance of my life. Because Victoria Ashford was about to learn that the most dangerous enemy is the one you never see coming. The transformation from observer to target happened gradually, then all at once. Victoria's Operational Excellence Initiative rolled out over the following weeks, like a carefully orchestrated campaign of systematic dehumanization. What I witnessed during those days taught me more about the anatomy of workplace cruelty than any business ethics course ever could. It started with small changes that seemed almost reasonable on the surface. New protocols required cleaning staff to badge in and out of every floor, creating a digital trail of our movements that Victoria claimed was for security optimization. In reality, it was a surveillance system designed to squeeze every minute of productivity from people who were already working at maximum capacity. The system generated reports that Victoria would review each morning, looking for any deviation from optimal efficiency that could justify disciplinary action. Rosa, who had been unofficially mentoring newer cleaning staff for years, suddenly found herself written up for unauthorized socialization during work hours, when Victoria's surveillance caught her explaining proper carpet cleaning techniques to a new hire. James received a formal reprimand for taking 30 seconds too long in the executive bathroom, unaware that he was being timed as he carefully cleaned around expensive fixtures that required delicate handling. Maria was cited for inefficient route planning when she detoured to empty an overflowing trash bin that wasn't technically on her assigned list but was creating an unsanitary condition. Each disciplinary action was documented with corporate precision, creating paper trails that would justify the eventual terminations Victoria had already planned. She was building legal protection for decisions she had made months ago, constructing a narrative of poor performance that would shield the company from wrongful termination lawsuits. Watching this process unfold was like witnessing a masterclass in institutional gaslighting, where dedicated employees were slowly convinced that their years of exemplary service had been inadequate all along. The psychological impact on the cleaning crew was devastating. People who had taken pride in their work began second-guessing every decision, afraid that any deviation from rigid protocols would result in another black mark on their employment record. The camaraderie that had made night shifts bearable evaporated as employees became afraid to help each other, worried that any interaction might be interpreted as time theft or insubordination. Rosa stopped humming the cheerful songs that had brightened everyone's mood for years. James developed a nervous habit of checking his watch every few minutes. Maria began working through her breaks, afraid that any pause in productivity might be seen as laziness. Victoria seemed to feed off this atmosphere of fear and uncertainty. She would arrive early some mornings, ostensibly to check on building operations, but really to catch employees in any minor violation of her increasingly complex rules. She implemented new requirements seemingly at random, changing expectations without notice, and then expressing disappointed surprise when people failed to meet standards they hadn't known existed. She had discovered that arbitrary power was intoxicating, that the ability to make other people afraid was its own form of entertainment. During my 6th month undercover, Victoria's attention began to focus specifically on me. I'm not sure what triggered her interest initially. Perhaps it was my refusal to show the kind of desperate gratitude she expected from people in my supposed position. Maybe it was the way I maintained eye contact when she spoke to me, failing to display the submissive body language she demanded from service staff. Or possibly it was simply that she had exhausted the entertainment value of tormenting my colleagues and needed a new target to maintain her sense of superiority. The first direct confrontation came on a Tuesday morning when I was cleaning the executive conference room where Victoria had held a particularly brutal budget meeting the night before. The room was deliberately trashed, with coffee cups abandoned on expensive mahogany tables, pastry crumbs ground into the imported carpet, and presentation materials scattered across surfaces I had spent an hour polishing the day before. It was clearly intentional destruction, a message that my work meant nothing to people like her. I was methodically restoring order to the chaos when Victoria entered, her heels clicking against the marble floor with the precise rhythm of someone who enjoyed making dramatic entrances. She was wearing a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than most people earned in 2 months, her blonde hair styled in perfect waves that framed her face like a crown of spun gold. Everything about her appearance was calculated to project power and untouchability. "Elena, isn't it?" she said, though we both knew she had access to every employee's personnel file and could have recited my supposed background from memory. Her voice carried the kind of practiced warmth that barely concealed complete contempt. "I've been hearing interesting things about your performance lately." I continued cleaning, maintaining the posture of someone who needed this job desperately and couldn't afford to antagonize her supervisor. "Yes, ma'am. I try my best every day." Victoria laughed, a sound like crystal breaking. "Your best? How admirable. Tell me, Elena, do you think your best is good enough for a company like Meridian Financial?" The question was loaded with implications. Victoria wasn't asking about my cleaning abilities. She was establishing dominance, forcing me to acknowledge her superiority and my own expendability. This was how she operated, using seemingly innocent questions to make people diminish themselves, to accept her narrative about their worthlessness. "I hope so, ma'am. This job means everything to me. I'm grateful for the opportunity to work here." "Grateful," Victoria repeated, savoring the word like fine wine. "That's interesting. Because gratitude should show in results, don't you think? And frankly, I'm not seeing the kind of results that justify your continued employment here." She walked to the conference table where I had been working and deliberately knocked over a water glass, sending liquid cascading across the polished surface and onto the carpet below. The action was so casual, so thoughtlessly cruel, that it took my breath away. She was creating work for me while simultaneously criticizing the quality of my efforts, a perfect example of the impossible standards she used to justify her cruelty. "Clean that up," she said, settling into a chair to watch my reaction, "and while you're doing it, think about whether you really belong in a place like this. Think about whether someone with your limited capabilities should be taking up space that could be filled by someone more qualified." I knelt to clean up the spilled water, using the task as an opportunity to compose myself and plan my response. Every instinct screamed at me to reveal who I really was, to strip away her smug superiority with the truth about our actual relationship. But I had committed to this experiment, and I was learning too much about Victoria's true character to abandon it now. Besides, I was beginning to formulate a plan that would be far more effective than simple revelation. "I understand your concerns, ma'am," I said carefully. "I know I'm not the smartest or most skilled person here. But I work hard, and I care about doing things right. Maybe if you could tell me specifically what I'm doing wrong, I could improve." Victoria's eyes lit up with predatory interest. She had interpreted my response as submission, as confirmation that I accepted her superiority and was begging for her guidance. This was exactly the dynamic she craved, the acknowledgement that she held absolute power over someone else's livelihood and dignity. "What you're doing wrong," she said slowly, "is thinking that effort is enough. This is Meridian Financial, not some small-town diner where good intentions matter more than results. We have standards here, Elena. Standards that, frankly, might be beyond your reach." She stood and walked closer, invading my personal space in a way that was clearly intended to intimidate. "You see, some people are meant for greatness, and others are meant to serve those people. There's no shame in knowing your place, but there is shame in pretending to be something you're not." The irony of her words was so profound that I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing. Victoria Ashford, who was literally serving at my pleasure while thinking she was humiliating her boss, was lecturing me about knowing my place. She was so convinced of her own superiority that she couldn't imagine any reality where the power dynamic wasn't exactly what it appeared to be. Over the following weeks, Victoria's campaign against me intensified with the focused cruelty of someone who had found their perfect victim. She began scheduling unnecessary meetings in rooms I had just cleaned, then expressing frustration that the facilities weren't properly maintained. She would drop things deliberately when she saw me approaching, then comment loudly about the building's cleanliness standards. She started arriving early to inspect areas I had worked, armed with a tablet to document every microscopic flaw she could identify. The other executives began to notice Victoria's behavior, but rather than seeing it as problematic, they interpreted it as evidence of her high standards and attention to detail. She was building a reputation as someone who demanded excellence from everyone, regardless of their position in the company hierarchy. The fact that she was tormenting a powerless employee was seen as proof of her commitment to corporate standards rather than evidence of her fundamental lack of humanity. But Victoria's most devastating attack came through her manipulation of company policy. She convinced the board to implement a new performance accountability system for all non-executive employees, complete with mandatory evaluations, productivity metrics, and improvement plans. On paper, it sounded like a reasonable human resources initiative. In practice, it was a weapon designed to provide legal justification for eliminating anyone she wanted gone. The evaluation process was particularly insidious because it created an illusion of fairness while being fundamentally rigged against the people being assessed. Cleaning staff were rated on criteria like professional communication and strategic thinking that had nothing to do with their actual job responsibilities. They were measured against standards that changed without notice and compared to metrics that were impossible to achieve given the resources and time allocated to their tasks. I watched my colleagues struggle with evaluations that were designed to make them fail. Rosa, who spoke English as a second language but communicated perfectly well with everyone who needed her services, was marked down for communication deficiencies. James, whose deep knowledge of building systems was invaluable but difficult to quantify, received poor scores for lacking measurable expertise. Maria, who was months away from her accounting degree, was criticized for insufficient educational credentials, despite performing her current job flawlessly. The improvement plans that followed these evaluations were exercises in systematic demoralization. Employees were required to attend, quote, professional development sessions during their own time. Unpaid hours spent listening to presentations about topics completely unrelated to their work. They were assigned mentors from other departments who had no understanding of their actual job requirements, but were authorized to provide performance feedback. They were given goals that were mathematically impossible to achieve with the resources available to them. Victoria attended some of these sessions herself, ostensibly to show her commitment to employee development, but really to enjoy watching people struggle with impossible expectations. She would ask questions designed to highlight their educational limitations, make suggestions that revealed her complete ignorance of their actual work, and generally treat the sessions like entertainment rather than legitimate professional development. The psychological warfare was expertly crafted. Victoria never crossed lines that would expose her to harassment lawsuits or discrimination complaints. She never used explicitly derogatory language or made obviously unfair demands. Instead, she created a system where dedicated employees were slowly convinced that their years of excellent service had been inadequate, where people who took pride in their work began to doubt their own competence. I documented everything, taking detailed notes about each incident and maintaining careful records of Victoria's systematic campaign of psychological destruction. But more importantly, I was learning lessons about leadership that no business school could teach. I was seeing firsthand how a single person's character could poison an entire organization, how cruelty disguised as high standards could destroy the morale and dignity of dozens of people. Every night, I would return to my apartment and review the day's observations, but now my analysis was focused on more than just understanding the company culture. I was planning Victoria's downfall with the same methodical precision she was using to destroy my colleagues. She had shown me exactly who she was when she thought no one important was watching. Now I was going to show her what real power looked like, when wielded by someone who actually understood the value of every person in the organization. The final phase of my education was about to begin, and Victoria Ashford was going to learn that the most dangerous enemy is always the one hiding in plain sight. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.